Excellent. Well, thank you very, very much. Thank you very much, Rachel and Steve, and thank you so much to Auckland Mathematics Association for hosting these amazing sessions nationwide now, which is such a boon for everybody. But thank you also very much for inviting me for this session this morning. I'm nervous and I'm hoping to do my very best, but once again, I find myself in a situation where I feel a fraud because, as you know, or you will know soon, I don't have Pacific heritage. But here I am talking about, or trying to talk about, what some research I've been doing with my Pacific colleagues here at Te Herenga Waka is telling us about some aspects of Tapasā. So my apologies, I'm doing my best. I have a great, the team that I work with is really good, but there's a lot of this session is going to be people sharing their ideas, and I know it's really lovely to see familiar faces in amongst the group, and in the breakout rooms, please do share with one another, and we're going to get lots of perspectives on these values that we're looking at in Tapasā. So welcome everybody to the session. The first thing I'd say I will introduce myself properly a little bit more. So kia ora te whānau, ko te herenga waka tōku marae, ko te whānau ako pai ki te upoko o te ika a Maui, tōku whānau, ko Robin Averill ahau. I work at Victoria University of Wellington, helping prepare student teachers. And so this research came from our desire to do a better job with knowing how to prepare our student teachers to teach Pacific students, Pacific heritage students, as well as possible. So we hummed and hawed and thought, what's the best thing to do? And this research is ongoing, but we've been working on it for a few years across early childhood, primary, secondary and tertiary institutions. And so we thought, what are common across all of those? We started this work before Tapasā, when there was the Pacific Education Plan, and there were 9 values that are fundamental to that plan, and that's why we chose the values to explore. Because they're written in English, we thought that there's potential for people to have different interpretations of them, particularly as Pacifica is so diverse in itself in so many different ways. So we all take our understandings, whether we're Pacific heritage or not, to our interpretations of these values. So that's a little bit of background to the study. I'm not going to give you a research presentation. I'm going to expect you to be discussing and thinking and talking with one another. So welcome to Saturday morning, and I hope you'll enjoy it. I do want to acknowledge Pepe Rimini, who's the leader of this project, and Ali Glasgow, who's my colleague, who we work on this together very much. I also want to thank NZCER, who very kindly and generously have allowed a research article that we wrote last year about this project, the Respect article, to be shared. And so that came out on the email that was sent to you about the session. So I'm very grateful to NZCER. I've put the link for the Tapasā document into the chat, so hopefully you can click on the link and open the document. You'll find that useful in the 3rd chat, so you've got a bit of time to work out doing that in the 3rd breakout room. For each part, we're going to share our own ideas, and then I'm going to give you some quotes or some examples from our Pacific participants in the study, so we can be thinking what we think first and then comparing with some of the study data. And towards the end, I'll share some of the conclusions that we've been coming up with and some of the implications. I'm very keen on feedback, and so you'll have my email address. I'm very keen on any feedback during or before or after the session. So thank you very much for coming. That's a little brief overview. So the purpose today is to describe some priorities of Tapasā and implications of these for our teaching. We're going to identify the values that are central to the success compass, which is in the top right. That's a fundamental part of Tapasā, the Pacifica Success Compass. And the second circle right in the center has these 9 values. So they are really important. They're placed in an important position. And so we're going to think about what those are today and think about classroom strategies that can demonstrate these values and to nurture these values. And we're going to be thinking and reflecting on the depth of meaning of these values for many Pacific people, by considering some ideas from the data. So if that's not what you thought you were coming for, then now's a good time to dip out, because that's what we're going to be doing. So in outline, we're going to explore some aspects of Tapasā, including the values that are in the centre. We're going to do this through some breakout rooms, sharing some data, some breakout rooms, sharing some data, thinking about ngā turu in Tapasā, and then sharing some findings and implications from the study. We'll also talk about finding out more, and now there are lots and lots of resources that help support Tapasā, and so some of those links were in the information that was sent out about the session as well. So if this piques your interest, there is now a lot of resource available to take next steps. And this area is huge, and we're only going to really have a little glimpse of these 9 values today. For example, in an interview I did with a Pacifica teacher the other day, I asked their interpretation of one value, and later I'll tell you a bit more about that. But I just want to emphasize that this is not the, this is what it means, go and do it. This is a scratching this very surface of ideas, and a very big, just a glimpse, a very overview. So first of all, if you could think to yourself, there are 9 there at the centre, without looking at the Pacific compass, the success compass, and without looking at any of the other slides or whatever's come out. If you could think to yourself, can you count to the 9? Can you put them in your head? So I'd like to see some hands up of, yeah, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many people have got of the 9 Pacific values? So just have a think. Do you know what they are? Or can you guess what they are? If you haven't spent much time thinking about them already. If you've got to 5, great. If you've got to 9, superb. So here they are. These are the values that we're going to talk a bit about today. So the top line were the 3 that we started exploring in the first year of the study. And in the study, what we've done is we've interviewed educators, teachers, educators from early childhood through to tertiary. What are their perspectives? What does service mean to them? What does respect mean to them? What does leadership mean to them? We've included Pacific teachers and non-Pacific teachers at each sector. In the second year of the study, we collected data on the middle line, reciprocal relationships, family, spirituality. And we're just starting to collect data on the last line, belonging, aroha, or love, inclusion. So those are the 9 values. So the first breakout room you've been looking forward to very much, we're going to put you in groups of 3. And what I'd like you to do is say hello to one another, introduce yourself to one another, choose 1 or 2 of these values before the breakout room. So choose one now, and think about, what does that mean? What does that value mean to you? So what we've also done in the study, we've interviewed and then we've observed lessons and classrooms. So we've been looking for, how does this value play out in the teacher's practice? How are they demonstrating the value and how are they nurturing it? So we're going to look at that data a little bit later on. But the first part, we start with an interview. What does this value mean to you? And so choose 1 or 2 and think about what it means to you. And we're going to have 5 minutes in breakout rooms where you're going to talk with 2 other people about the value that you've chosen and what it means to you. And you might be talking about the same one as one another or different ones, doesn't really matter. It's just a start to start thinking about things. So have fun, see you in 5 minutes. Rachel's going to do the honours of putting you into the breakout rooms.
Okay, so they should all have been invited to join one.
Robin, I'm going to be leaving early
You want to say?
because I want to catch the one at 10 o'clock.
No, that's fine. I'll be finishing before then anyway, I think 1:45. But yeah, absolutely. Go when you need to.
Okay, we're back recording again, Robin.
Okay, so welcome back to the room. So I hope that that worked for most people. I realised that there were some issues with breakout rooms, so we might, and time is passing. So thank you very much for your discussions. And now I'd like to share some of the examples that came from the data. So these first 3 quotes are about service. All of the quotes that I'm going to read out were from Pacific teachers at one level or another. So one of the things that I noticed about, I'll read them first and then tell you. So service is giving everything I have and others giving everything they have, and realizing that you're not just an entity in yourself, but you're part of a whole larger community and family. Another person said, that's the biggest thing for me about my teaching, providing service that scaffolds these kids learning to be successful in life. If they make progress and succeed, it'll be a big success for them, the family, the church, because we're not individuals, we represent the church, the community, the village. Another person, service is embedded, it's your core purpose. It's more than just serving, it's ensuring the needs of your elders, community, family, and children are all met. One of the things that we've noticed in our interviews is the communication is very deeply heartfelt for many of our Pacific teachers, to the point that at some points when they're explaining the values, they're weeping with the intensity of the feeling and the concern that these values are not in place for all of the children that they're teaching and the children that they know. So family, and so just some examples of several of the values. We're not going to go through all of them, but family is probably more important than anything else for me personally.
Possibly.
It's kind of, it's not really a saying thing that some Islanders say.
There's no sound.
And again, these
There's
are
a mute button there.
these are from, all of these quotes are from Pacific teachers. There's a saying, but a thing that some Pacific Islanders say, it's like family to loyalty. It means family to the death. What it means is that they would choose to protect and uphold and maintain that family kind of unit above other things. And to someone else, to me, family is everything. It's at the core with my faith. Everything I do is for the family. Family is at the forefront and the center of everything. My parents would say, you carry your family's name everywhere you go. And so your actions affect and come back to the family. Respect, some quotes. Respect is having empathy and looking at things from the other person's perspective, considering the wealth of knowledge and strengths and skills that this person can bring, that this community can bring. Humility is an important starting point in terms of that respectful relationship. It gives parents a sense of we are valued, we feel valued, you value us, and our children aren't going to lose their sense of identity. They're going to retain who they are and be proud of it as well. And respect is showing you know that the student isn't just a person arriving at school on their own, but there's a big family that surrounds them. Spirituality was the value that we've had the most diverse responses to. We've had responses in terms of Christian faith or religion, both amongst non-Pacific teachers and Pacific teachers. We've had some whose spirituality is not an important thing. We've had some where spirituality is not the church thing, but it's the intangible, the unseen. It's this, it's another sense. But for some, spirituality is built into all parts of our lives. At our learning sessions, we build in spiritual principles and rituals such as prayers, pure and himene, religious hymns. We remember our ancestors who've passed, and it also builds in our children a strong sense of cultural identity and belonging. We begin with opening prayers and we always bless the food. It doesn't feel complete starting our day without it. So I wanted to choose those ones as an example of sort of some of the depth of feeling that some people hold for these Pacific values. We won't have a breakout room for this, but what I'd like you to do is to choose one of these and to think in your teaching or in the classroom, if you were observing somebody else's teaching, what would you look for to notice that service was being demonstrated and nurtured, or that respect was being demonstrated or nurtured, or love or araha was being demonstrated or nurtured in the classroom. Because we've been trying to make up lists of indicators for our student teachers of these are the kinds of things to look for, these are the kinds of things to do. So I just want you to think on your own about choose one, and how would you demonstrate that in your teaching, or how would you see it demonstrated in somebody else's? If you just choose for a moment belonging and think to yourself, how would you demonstrate belonging as a value in your classroom? And how would you nurture belonging in your class and students? For some people, we found that it's quite hard to identify the kinds of things to look for or to be noticing. But for others of our participants, it is very, very easy. So yesterday I did an interview with a Pacific teacher who spoke on belonging when I asked that same question, who spoke for 50 minutes without any prompts about what belonging meant in terms of the classroom in the widest possible sense. It was articulate, and it was the depth of what these values mean. I cannot understate that she could speak for 50 minutes all on different aspects of belonging and what that meant for classroom teaching and for learners in the classroom. So I want to give you another example, and that's the love. I put it in red, aroha. And in the Pacific Education Plan, the word is love. To think about how would you demonstrate that or see that in the classroom? What would we be looking for when we sit at the back of the classroom and we're trying to note down our observation data? And then I'm going to just give you on the next slide a list of what one Pacific educator said when I asked that question. What does aroha look like in the classroom? And again, very eloquent and just came out. So it's a close connection with children, love in the eyes of the child and the teacher, the student and the teacher, connecting, fostering relationships that come from love. It's a desire to maintain well-being of learners and showing a wholehearted commitment to the child, being an advocate for the child, seeing and linking to learners' passions and learning activities. Again, this, I've put it as bullet points, but she just listed all of these things that came straight out. Seeing and responding to body language and responses, going beyond, wanting to do the best for the child and family, including ideas and beliefs of the child and family in decision-making, ensuring student enjoyment is noticed and capitalized on, looking at the essence of an individual and meeting their needs, doing things in a loving way, showing compassion, consideration, and seeing things from the other's perspectives, devoted to learners, positive reactions of students to the teacher's presence, proximity, and interactions, and students showing respect, tolerance, and care for the teacher. So some of us find it hard to think about what these values might look like in practice, but some people have got lots of answers. This was a Pacific teacher who gave these ideas. We won't go to breakout rooms, but this is my challenge. I know you've got a notebook that came with the invitation email. And so I think a useful thing that I wanted you to do, but we won't have time for this, and the breakout rooms, some people got, it wasn't entirely successful for everybody, is to look at the turu and to choose one, and then to look for examples in the indicators of the turu. So these are all in Tapasā, for examples of these values in place. So the reason for doing this would be A, to get a better handle on what the values are and to be thinking about the values, but B, to be looking into those indicators for Turu 2, for example, collaborative and respectful relationships, and seeing what those indicators are and thinking about the depth of the values that are needed for those. The same for Turu 3. So there's a little bit of homework for you. Okay, so what did we find? We found that while considering the Pacific values in teaching was new for many of the teachers that we interviewed, the values are able to be discussed in relation to teaching and teaching interactions with learners and with families, and we can see them in people's teaching. So the Pacific values we've collected data on to date are all important to all of our study teachers. Nobody said that respect was not an important thing. So all of the values, everybody, whether they were Pacific or non-Pacific, thought the values were important. However, overall, we found evidence that the values are interpreted differently by different Pacific and non-Pacific teachers. Everybody's an individual. We've all got our own separate views, regardless of our heritage, ethnicity. And they're practiced somewhat differently by the different sectors. Particularly early childhood and tertiary, you can imagine that there are some contrasts in the way that the values might play out. In general, Pacific teachers, we've found in our study, have more intense feelings about the values and enact more and stronger actions in their teaching and interactions with learners in relation to the Pacific values than non-Pacific teachers. And so my challenge is that we all, I think, could benefit from deeper and stronger knowledge and feelings about these values and actions in our teaching. I don't think that it's only Pacific learners that will respond better to our teaching if our teaching is taught is rich in these values. There's greater variety within and between Pacific and non-Pacific participants for some values than others. For example, spirituality drew a really wide range of interpretations and perspectives than the value of family. But then the family values for many of our Pacifica teachers were much more strongly stated than for our non-Pacifica. Considering the Pacific values in teaching and teaching interactions can enable indicators. We can find indicators of the values in practice. And so I don't expect you to be able to read this next slide. This is my warning. Oops. But just to say, that the left-hand table are indicators that we published in the SET article that's been sent to you about ways in which environments that strongly demonstrate respect can be shown. And we've got an article under review about service, and these are potential indicators for those. So ways of making sure that we are attending to these values in our practice. That's what we're trying to create. In summary, what we're calling for from our study, we think it's going to be really important to have increased numbers of teachers with Pacific heritage right across all of our sectors. We think that's fundamentally important. There is a lot of stress amongst some of the teachers that we've interviewed who are Pacific, who might be the only Pacific teacher in their institution. And I think we can all help with this. We can all be identifying students in our classes who we think would make great teachers because we see qualities in them. Many of the Pacific teachers that we talk to say that they hadn't thought about teaching until somebody said to them, hey, have you thought of teaching? You would be a great teacher. And they could name that person and that change in their direction from that time. So I think as math teachers, we can be looking out for these potential students, whether they're Pacific students or other students of other ethnicities that are not well represented in our maths teaching population, and identify their strengths and help them consider teaching as a career, and help them know what kinds of things are needed to do that. We're calling for more consultation and shared development with Pacific parents and families about the values and their priorities to enhance children's learning. We're hoping for increased focus on different pedagogies and practices. Teaching in some ways can help you demonstrate the values in your practice much more than teaching in other ways. And so it's thinking about which pedagogies and practices are going to really help with giving opportunities for nurturing those values of leadership in my students, those values of belonging and inclusion. There's a lot of literature and a lot of writing that is calling for teachers to, on top of their very busy jobs, have further knowledge and understanding of not only the Pacific values, but of Pacific worlds, and ensuring these are demonstrated in their teaching and interactions. But fortunately, there's a lot of resource that is available now to help with this, which is the next point. We're also suggesting that there should be consideration of entry criteria for initial teacher education programs for New Zealand teachers in relation to applicants' knowledge and understanding of Pacific worlds. it's hard to take student teachers from zero understanding to feeling confident and competent teaching Pacific learners really well within our teacher education programs, and we expect that they come with something. At the moment, we have no entry criteria in regard to that, but we're just raising the question about whether that should be considered. There's quite a lot of examples of resources. Here's one. You've got all the links for these, and we've just, some questions for you. So, can you now put up your fingers with what are your 9 values? Can you think about what the 9 values are? Hopefully you can list them more quickly now. This is one of my wind-up slides. And you've got your notebooks, but whether you use your notebooks or not, I'd like you to think about one implication for classroom practice from today's session for you or for your team or your department or your school. And I'm gifting you the answers to the second to last question. Tapasā's got a lot of stuff in it. It's a huge resource. It's got a lot of case studies which help unpack different ways of making a difference for Pacific learners. It's got some really useful guiding questions. It's got some Pacific frameworks for structures for trying to think about practice, and lots of links and references. So if you haven't spent a good bit of time with that beautiful document, that's a good starting point. And so we can come back to this slide, but my last one is just to say that there's lots of useful resources and links. Those are the things that we've published already. We've got another article that's coming out very soon, and one under review. So we're really trying to honour the participants by sharing their ideas and what we're learning with as many people as possible in as many ways as possible. And we're really very, very grateful to all who've been involved in the study. And for sharing their classrooms and sharing their learners with us. So our huge thanks, because we are learning so much, and it's such a privilege to be interviewing busy people and to be in their classrooms. So we're very grateful. We are extending the study next year. And so we have got some funding to come into more schools, so we're really looking forward to that. So thank you very, very much, Auckland Maths Association, and everybody for attending. And I'm really happy if anybody's got any questions or comments or suggestions. Very happy. We've got another few minutes for that. So thank you very much, Rachel.
We'll leave about 10 to, because Saturday could be a bit busy getting through.
Very much, Robin, for giving us lots to think about today, and for the links to all the resources that you've given us. I think that's lots of food for thought for people to go away and read up a bit more about what is available to support practice in this area. So if anyone has got some specific questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or just put your question in the chat line.
Oh, that's good.
Lots of thank yous, Robin. It's great to see. Yeah, and I think I'd emphasize what Shirley has said, is that there are lots of great ideas for all students, not just Pacifica students. You know, a lot of these values will support the learning of a whole range of cultures. So I think that's a really good point.
Oh, so the Linus Criticus is a journal of articles for educators, and we got invited to write an article. It's a South American journal, and so we've published in English in it. They invited us, so we wrote something for them. But actually, that one's available online. It's open, and I know that it's been viewed a lot of times. So we use whatever ways we can to get the information out there, and particularly journals that make their articles freely available is a really great thing.
I have one question, Robin. just want to ask you, some years ago you had put up some Maori patterns that were useful for algebra that we used with our year 9 and 10 classes, and that was when I used it with the classes, prepared a worksheet involving how to set out an algebraic equation. Using those patterns, the Maori students were very proud and they were motivated, they were listening with interest. I'm just wondering, are there any resources that we can use? I have to look at the Tapasā thing carefully again, but I just wondered if you have something similar for Tapasā, the specific island patterns that we can use for algebra.
Okay, so that's a really good question, and I think there are resources, and I think the students will know resources. And thinking about that question, I want to answer in terms of discussions I've had with another very good friend and colleague of mine, Pania Tamaro, who I know presented for AMA last year.
Goes back in, is he?
Yeah, and she was talking about if you're using cultural examples, which is great in the classroom, to give integrity to both aspects. So to give integrity to the mathematics that we can see in whether it's Tapasā or whatever that happens to be, but also to give integrity to the cultural activity itself. And so that students see that, yes, we're not just clutching the math out of this activity, we're thinking at the integrity of the cultural activity and how important it is and how valuable it is and how the skills that take to make this thing. But we can also see some Western mathematics in it as well, whether it's transformation geometry or whether it's algebra or whether it's whatever. So I think, yes, there are lots of wonderful resources in the Pacific where we can see our Western maths, and we can bring those into the classroom, particularly if we've got really good relationships with our students and they feel comfortable with that. But hopefully also they'll feel comfortable to tell their own stories if we start the conversation about showing we know about the integrity of the cultural activity itself as well. So that we're doing justice to both things and we're trying not to confuse them in the students' eyes. So that's a long answer to a short question, but I don't have a package of resources that I can give. But yes, I do encourage that we do look for and have the sensitivity to know which are suitable resources and the sensitivity to know when to use things or how to use things in a particular way. So for example, the lovely cloth lava lavas often have lovely geometrical patterns, but we need to be aware that they also are used to wrap our body. So there are places we might put them and places we might not put them, in terms of we might not lay it out on a table, for example. So I think we need to have some sensitivities around and be careful but to have, if we've got good relationships with our students and conversations are open, we can learn as well as students can learn. But yeah, I really do go for Pania's idea of the integrity of the cultural context with sensitivity and looking at the mathematics examples as well. The nice thing about the values is it doesn't matter our content. These are things always important, regardless of the content, regardless of the context we're using. These are about our behaviors. And so yes, and all of these things. Yeah. So sorry, long answer.
No, thank you. Very valuable.